The galaxy had known peace for 3,000 years. The Galactic Concord, an alliance of 12 different species, had built this peace with careful words and balanced power. They had created laws that all followed. They had built trade routes that connected a million worlds. They had made war a thing of the past, a memory that only historians studied. The Concord believed they had conquered the darkness between stars. They were wrong. High Counselor Vethron of the Kalari species stood in the observation deck of the council station. His four eyes watched the stars spin slowly past the massive windows. The Kalari were an old race, one of the founding members of the Concord. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched younger species take their first steps into space. They believed they understood the universe. A junior officer rushed into the room. His scales had turned pale with fear. "High Counselor, we have received a distress signal from the outer colonies." Vethron turned slowly. "Which colony?" "All of them, sir. All 17 outer colonies have gone silent in the last 6 hours." The High Counselor felt something he had not felt in decades. He felt afraid. The first reports came from the Mithrani home system. A fleet of ships had emerged from the dark space between galaxies, from the empty void where no stars burned. The ships were black as death itself, covered in angles and shapes that hurt the eyes to look upon. They moved in ways that defied known physics. And then the images came. Images of the beings inside those ships. The Vethkai were nightmares given form. They stood 3 meters tall on 8 limbs that ended in curved claws. Their bodies were covered in armor that seemed to grow from their flesh like bone. They had no faces that any Concord species could understand, only clusters of eyes that glowed with cold hunger and mouths filled with teeth designed for tearing meat. But their bodies were not the worst part. The worst part was what they did to minds. The Vethkai were psychic predators. They fed on fear. Their very presence sent waves of terror into the minds of other beings. Strong warriors dropped their weapons and wept like children. Hardened soldiers ran screaming into the void rather than face them. Entire populations fell to madness before a single Vethkai even landed on their worlds. The Concord had no records of the Vethkai, but ancient texts, stories dismissed as myths, spoke of demons from the void, monsters that had hunted the first starfaring species millions of years ago. Horrors that had been driven back into the darkness between galaxies, where they had waited and grown hungry. Now they had returned. The Concord responded as they always did. They called for diplomacy. They sent ambassadors to speak with the Vethkai. The ambassadors' ships were found 3 days later, drifting in space. The ambassadors themselves were found inside, still alive, still aware, but missing most of their bodies. The Vethkai had kept them alive to feed on their fear for as long as possible. There would be no diplomacy. The combined fleet of the Galactic Concord gathered at the Thassan system. 4,000 warships from 12 species, the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. They moved to engage the Vethkai invasion fleet. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Concord lost 3,000 ships. The Vethkai lost none. The demon ships absorbed energy weapons like water into sand. Missiles exploded harmlessly against their hulls. And everywhere the Vethkai went, their psychic emanations spread like poison gas. Ship crews turned on each other. Captains flew their vessels into stars. Entire squadrons simply stopped fighting and waited to die. The survivors fled. They carried news of the defeat to every corner of the galaxy. And behind them, the Vethkai advanced, taking world after world. They did not want resources. They did not want territory. They wanted only to hunt, to feed, to spread fear across the stars. Billions died in the first month. Entire species faced extinction. The Concord, that proud alliance that had maintained peace for millennia, crumbled like paper in a fire. At the edge of the galaxy, far from the main invasion routes, a small species watched these events with careful attention. They were the newest members of the Concord, accepted only 50 years ago. They were considered weak, primitive, barely worthy of membership. They had no great fleets. They had no psychic abilities. They had no ancient wisdom. They were humans. Ambassador Sarah Chen received the news of the Concord's defeats in her office on Earth. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes. She had served humanity for 40 years in various roles. She had seen much in that time, but she had never seen anything like this. The Kalari have requested our assistance, her aide reported. They are asking all member species to contribute to the defense effort. Chen nodded slowly. What do they expect from us? Nothing, ma'am. They barely mentioned us in the general communication. We are too small, too far away, too insignificant. Chen smiled at that. It was not a warm smile. Show me the tactical data on these Vethkai. For 3 days, Chen studied everything the Concord had gathered about the enemy. She watched recordings of battles. She read reports from survivors. She analyzed the psychic attack patterns, the combat tactics, the hunting behaviors. Then she sent a message to certain people, people whose names did not appear in any official records, people who had spent their lives training for situations that most believed would never occur. 3 weeks after the fall of the combined fleet, a Vethkai raiding party entered the human colony system of New Meridian. It was a small force, only 5 ships and perhaps 2,000 warriors. They came expecting easy prey. The humans had no fleet presence in the system. The colony had only basic defenses. It would be a simple hunt. The Vethkai landed in the capital city just as dawn broke over the mountains. They spread through the streets, their psychic emanations washing over the population. They expected screaming. They expected running. They expected the sweet taste of terror. They got none of these things. The humans of New Meridian did not run. They did not scream. They did not fall to madness as every other species had. Instead, they looked at the Vethkai with something the demons had never seen before. They looked at them with anger. The first Vethkai warrior died when a farming tool, swung by a woman half his size, crushed the cluster of eyes on the left side of his head. The second died when 3 men tackled him and held him down, while a fourth found the gaps in his natural armor. The third died when a child, no more than 10 years old, shot him 17 times with her mother's hunting rifle. The Vethkai were not prepared for this. They were predators. They were used to prey that fled and begged and broke. They were not used to prey that fought back. They were not used to prey that seemed to welcome the fight. The colonists of New Meridian had no military training. They had no advanced weapons. They had only their hands, their tools, and a rage that burned hotter than the Vethkai's psychic fire. They died by the hundreds, but for every human that fell, a Vethkai fell with them. The raid should have lasted 3 hours. It lasted 3 days. When the Vethkai finally retreated to their ships, they had lost over 400 warriors. It was the first significant loss they had suffered since returning to the galaxy. Their commander sent a report to the Hive Admiral describing the strange species that did not fear death, that seemed to embrace violence like a lover. The report included a warning. These humans are dangerous. Do not underestimate them. The Hive Admiral read the report and dismissed it. 400 warriors lost to primitives? It was an embarrassment, nothing more. The commander had clearly been incompetent. The humans were weak, like all the other species. They would break eventually. They would learn to fear. This was the Hive Admiral's first mistake. It would not be his last. On Earth, Ambassador Chen received news of the New Meridian defense. She read the casualty reports with a heavy heart. So many dead, so many families destroyed. But she also read the enemy casualty reports, and she allowed herself a moment of pride. The Vethkai had come expecting sheep. They had found wolves. Chen called a meeting with the heads of Earth's military. They gathered in a secure bunker beneath the Alps, far from any prying eyes or ears. These were hard men and women, People who had dedicated their lives to preparing for threats that most of humanity never knew existed. The Concorde will fall, Chen told them. Their fleets are broken. Their populations are in panic. Within a year, the Vethkai will control most of the galaxy. And then they will come for us, General Morrison said. He was a large man with a scarred face and cold eyes. Yes, Chen agreed, but not yet. The Vethkai are focused on the core systems. They see us as insignificant. We have time. Time for what? Admiral Wong asked. Chen looked around the room. These people had trained their entire careers for a moment like this. They had preserved knowledge and skills that most of humanity had forgotten. They had kept alive traditions of warfare that dated back thousands of years to times when humans fought with spears and arrows and nothing but courage. Time to prepare, Chen said. Time to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten humanity. She activated a holographic display. It showed tactical data on the Vethkai, their fleet positions, their command structure, their weaknesses. The Concorde tried to fight the Vethkai with conventional warfare, Chen continued. Fleet against fleet. They lost because the Vethkai are superior in that kind of fight. Their ships are more advanced. Their psychic abilities give them an advantage in large-scale combat. She changed the display. Now it showed something different. Small teams of soldiers, insertion routes behind enemy lines, high-value targets marked for elimination. We will not fight them that way. We will fight them the way we have always fought when outnumbered and outgunned. We will fight them in the shadows. We will fight them with fear. General Morrison leaned forward. You're talking about unconventional warfare, guerrilla tactics, assassination, terror. I'm talking about winning, Chen said. The Vethkai are predators. They have never been prey. They do not know what it feels like to be hunted. We will teach them. She looked at Morrison directly. General, I need your best people, not soldiers, operators, the ones who can do impossible things in impossible situations, the ones who have been training for exactly this kind of fight. Morrison nodded slowly. You want the special forces? I want all of them, Chen said. Every team we have. This will be the most important mission in human history. Admiral Wong raised a concern. The conquered will never accept this. They believe in rules of war, in civilized conflict. What you're proposing, they will call it barbaric. Chen's expression did not change. The Concorde is dying, Admiral. Their rules did not save them. Their civilization did not protect them. We will do what we must to survive, and when this is over, they will thank us for it. She stood and faced the room. Prepare your people. In 2 months, we will deploy to the front lines. The Vethkai believe they are the monsters of this galaxy. They are wrong. Her voice dropped to something cold and quiet. They have not yet met us. In the darkness of space, the Vethkai continued their advance. They consumed world after world. They fed on the fear of trillions. They believed themselves unstoppable, invincible, the ultimate predators in a galaxy of prey. They had no idea what was coming for them. They had no idea that somewhere in the galaxy, in training facilities hidden from all records, men and women were preparing. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were the product of 10,000 years of human warfare. They had inherited the legacy of every warrior tradition Earth had ever produced. They had been forged in the fires of countless conflicts, tempered by generations of blood and sacrifice. They were the special forces, and they were very, very good at what they did. The Vethkai had brought war to the galaxy. They had brought death and fear and destruction. Humanity was about to bring something worse. The conquered High Council met in emergency session for the 47th time in 3 months. The Great Chamber, once filled with representatives from 12 proud species, now held only frightened survivors. 3 of the founding members had been completely destroyed. Their homeworlds were now hunting grounds for the Vethkai. Their populations existed only in refugee ships fleeing toward the galactic core. High Counselor Vethron stood at the center podium. His scales had lost their shine. His four eyes were dim with exhaustion and grief. He had watched everything he had spent his life building crumble to dust. "We have received reports from the 7th Defense Line," he announced. His voice cracked as he spoke. "It has fallen. The Vethkai fleet is now moving toward the Sand Prime." The Sand Prime, the capital world of the Concord, the symbol of galactic unity. If it fell, the Concord itself would cease to exist. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted over each other. Some demanded immediate evacuation. Others called for surrender. A few simply wept. Through it all, one delegate remained silent. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in the small section reserved for humanity. She watched the chaos with patient eyes. She had been waiting for this moment for weeks, waiting for the Concord to become desperate enough to listen. Vethran raised his hands for silence. "We have exhausted our military options. Our fleets are destroyed. Our armies are scattered. We have nothing left to fight with." "Then we surrender," the Mithrani delegate said. "We accept whatever terms they offer. Perhaps they will show mercy." Chen spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, but somehow it cut through the noise like a blade. "The Vethakai do not offer terms. They do not show mercy. They are not interested in conquest. They are interested in hunting." The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to the human ambassador. "What would you know of war, human?" the Kellery delegate asked. There was contempt in his voice. "Your species has barely learned to travel between stars. You have no great fleets. You have no ancient wisdom. What could you possibly offer?" Chen stood slowly. She was small compared to most species in the room. She looked fragile, weak, exactly what the Concord expected of humanity. "You are correct," she said. "We have no great fleets. We have no planet-destroying weapons. We have no psychic powers or energy shields or any of the technologies you consider essential for warfare." She paused and looked around the room. "But we have something else. Something we have spent 10,000 years perfecting. Something that your civilized species abandoned long ago because you thought it was primitive." "And what is that?" Vethran asked. Chen smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "We know how to kill." The chamber erupted again. Delegates protested that warfare was about more than killing. It was about strategy, about technology, about logistics and supply lines and orbital mechanics. Killing was simple. Any species could kill. Chen waited for the noise to die down. Then she continued. "You are right that any species can kill, but humans do not just kill. We hunt. We stalk. We track our prey across continents and years if necessary. We study our enemies until we know them better than they know themselves. And then we strike, not with fleets or armies, but with small groups of specialists trained to do one thing and do it perfectly." She activated a holographic display. It showed tactical data, maps, timelines. The Vethkai have one critical weakness. They have never faced an enemy that could threaten them individually. Their strength comes from their ships, their numbers, their psychic abilities. But take away those advantages, isolate them from their support, and they become vulnerable. "Impossible," the Kalari delegate said. "The Vethkai cannot be isolated. They move in packs. They support each other constantly." "Nothing is impossible," Chen replied. "Only difficult. And humans have spent our entire history doing difficult things." She changed the display. Now it showed images of human soldiers. They were not impressive to look at. No gleaming armor, no massive weapons, just quiet men and women in dark clothing, faces painted with shadows. "These are what we call special forces," Chen said. "They are the finest warriors humanity has ever produced. They can infiltrate any location, eliminate any target, and disappear before the enemy knows they were there. They have trained for years in the arts of unconventional warfare. They have studied the Vethkai since the invasion began. They are ready. Ready for what? Vethron asked. Ready to teach the Vethkai what it means to be prey. The council debated for 3 days. Many delegates argued against accepting human help. They did not trust these small, fragile beings. They did not understand how a few hundred soldiers could make any difference against an enemy that had destroyed billions. But desperation is a powerful motivator, and the Concord was very, very desperate. On the 4th day, the council voted to accept humanity's offer. They had no other choice. Ambassador Chen sent a single encrypted message back to Earth. It contained only 2 words: begin deployment. Across human space, in hidden facilities on a dozen worlds, those words set something in motion. Men and women who had spent their lives waiting for exactly this moment received their orders. They gathered their equipment. They said goodbye to families who knew better than to ask questions. They boarded ships that did not officially exist. Major James Walker was one of these people. He had served in the Special Forces for 15 years. He had completed missions that would never appear in any history book. He had killed more enemies than he could count, in more ways than most people could imagine. He was very good at his job. Now he sat in the briefing room of a transport ship, surrounded by his team. 8 men and women, each one a specialist in some aspect of warfare. Snipers, explosives experts, close-quarters combat specialists, electronic warfare operators. Together they formed Spectre Team, one of 12 teams being deployed to Thesson Prime. Listen up, Walker said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. It was the voice of a man who had learned that true confidence did not require volume. You've all read the briefing materials. You know what we're facing. The Vethkai are bigger, stronger, and tougher than us. They can see in the dark. They can sense fear. They can shrug off wounds that would kill any human. He paused and looked at each team member in turn. But they have never faced an enemy like us. They hunt in packs because they have never needed to be careful. They rely on their psychic abilities because they have never met a species that could resist them. They believe they are the ultimate predators. Walker smiled. It was a thin, cold expression that did not reach his eyes. We are going to show them how wrong they are. Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, the team's sniper, leaned forward. What's our primary objective? Chaos, Walker replied. The Vethkai have occupied Thesson Prime for 60 days. They have established a command structure, patrol routes, supply lines. They feel safe. Our job is to make them feel unsafe. We will strike their leaders. We will destroy their supplies. We will kill them in ways that make no sense, that follow no pattern, that cannot be predicted or defended against. Psychological warfare, Lieutenant Chen said. He was the team's youngest member, a specialist in electronic systems and communications. Exactly, the Vethkai feed on fear. They have never tasted it themselves. We will give them a full meal. The transport ship traveled for 2 weeks, taking a route that avoided all known Vethkai patrol areas. It was a small vessel, barely larger than a shuttle, designed for stealth rather than comfort. The team spent the journey preparing, studying, planning. They analyzed thousands of hours of footage from Thesson Prime. They memorized the faces and habits of every Vethkai commander. They learned the patrol schedules, the communication frequencies, the locations of supply depots and command centers. They practiced their insertion routes until they could navigate them blindfolded. Walker watched his team with quiet pride. These were not ordinary soldiers. Each one had been selected from thousands of candidates. Each one had survived training programs that killed more than half of those who attempted them. Each one had proven, again and again, that they could do impossible things. And now they would prove it to the galaxy. The transport dropped them at the edge of the Thesan system. They transferred to insertion pods, tiny vessels designed for one purpose, getting them to the surface without being detected. The pods had no weapons, no shields, minimal life support. They were coffins with engines, built to be invisible to sensors. Walker sealed himself into his pod and felt the familiar embrace of the dark. He had done this dozens of times before, falling through space toward enemy territory. But this time was different. This time, the fate of the galaxy might depend on what he and his team did next. The pods fell through the atmosphere of Thesan Prime, their heat shields glowing briefly before cooling to match the temperature of the surrounding air. They landed in a ruined section of the capital city, in an area the Vethkai had already swept and dismissed as empty. Walker emerged from his pod and breathed alien air for the first time. The city around him was devastated. Buildings had collapsed. Streets were choked with debris. Bodies lay where they had fallen, ignored by the Vethkai who had killed them. One by one, his team emerged from their pods. They moved in silence, communicating with hand signals and subtle glances. They gathered their equipment and began to move through the ruins. Somewhere in the distance, a Vethkai hunting cry echoed through the night. The demons were out there, searching for prey, feeding on the fear of survivors who had managed to hide from them. Walker raised his hand, signaling his team to halt. They melted into the shadows, becoming invisible, becoming part of the darkness itself. The Vethkai were masters of the hunt. They had spent millions of years perfecting their predatory instincts. They could track prey across continents. They could sense fear from kilometers away. They believed no creature could hide from them. They were about to learn that humans were not ordinary creatures. Walker watched a Vethkai patrol pass within 10 meters of his position. The demons moved with casual arrogance, their weapons lowered, their attention scattered. Why should they be careful? Nothing on this world could threaten them. Nothing could even slow them down. Walker counted 8 Vethkai in the patrol. He noted their weapons, their formation, their communication devices. He memorized the markings on their armor, which identified their unit and rank. He recorded everything in his mind, building a picture of the enemy's structure and habits. The patrol passed. They never knew he was there. Walker signaled his team to move. They flowed through the ruins like water, silent and unstoppable. They had trained for years to move without making sound, to blend with any environment, to become ghosts. Tonight they were learning the terrain. Tomorrow they would begin the hunt. Across the city, 11 other teams were doing the same thing. 214 human operators scattered through a city occupied by 60,000 Vethkai. The numbers were absurd. The odds were impossible. But the special forces had never cared about odds. They cared about results. In orbit above Thesan Prime, the Vethkai Hive Admiral reviewed reports from the surface. The occupation was proceeding as expected. Resistance had been minimal. The surviving population was broken and terrified, perfect for hunting. One of his subordinates mentioned that human ships had been detected at the edge of the system. Small vessels, insignificant, probably refugees trying to escape. The Hive Admiral dismissed them without concern. Humans were weak. Everyone knew that. He returned to planning the next phase of the invasion. There were still many worlds to conquer, many species to hunt. The galaxy was full of prey, and the Vethkai were very hungry. He never noticed the shadows that had begun to move through his territory. He never sensed the predators that had begun to study his forces. He never imagined that the hunters were about to become the hunted. That night, for the first time in millennia, the Vethkai would learn what it meant to be afraid. The wolves had awakened, and they were very, very hungry. Commander Vexthal had served the Vethkai Hive for 300 years. He had hunted prey across 1,000 worlds. He had killed more sentient beings than he could count. He was one of the most decorated warriors in the invasion fleet, trusted by the Hive Admiral himself. On the 61st day of the occupation of Thesson Prime, he died without ever seeing his killer. It happened at dawn. Vexthal stood on the balcony of what had been the planetary governor's mansion, surveying his domain. The city below him was broken, its buildings shattered, its streets empty except for the occasional Vethkai patrol. It was perfect. It was exactly what a conquered world should look like. He felt something impact his head. A small hole appeared in the cluster of eyes on his left side. Before he could understand what had happened, his body collapsed. 800 meters away, Sergeant Elena Rodriguez lowered her rifle. She had been lying in the rubble of a collapsed building for 19 hours, motionless, barely breathing. She had watched Vexthal's routine for 3 days, learning his habits, his patterns, the exact moment when he would stand in exactly the right spot. The shot had been perfect. Subsonic ammunition, modified to penetrate Vethakai natural armor, a single round through the primary brainstem, exactly where she had calculated it would cause instant death. Rodriguez did not celebrate. She did not wait to confirm the kill. She simply gathered her equipment and disappeared into the ruins, moving to her next position. There was more work to do. The Vethkai found Vextal's body an hour later. They did not understand what had happened. The wound was too small to be from any weapon they knew. There were no enemies nearby, no signs of infiltration. It was as if death itself had reached out and touched their commander. The Hive Admiral received the news with irritation rather than concern. Commanders died sometimes. It was unfortunate but not significant. He appointed a replacement and returned to his planning. The second commander died 3 days later. His name was Krath Vol, and he was in charge of the Eastern Occupation Zone. He died in his command bunker, surrounded by guards, in a room with only one entrance. The guards found him slumped over his communication console. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing. Medical examination revealed that he had inhaled a colorless, odorless gas that his species could not detect. The gas had stopped his heart in seconds. The bunker's ventilation system showed no signs of tampering. The guards had seen no one enter or leave. The gas had appeared from nowhere and killed with perfect efficiency. This time, the Hive Admiral paid attention. He ordered increased security for all commanders. He demanded that the patrols search for the enemy responsible. He wanted answers. He received none. The third commander died a week later, but he did not die quickly, and he did not die cleanly. His name was Jurvex, and he was considered one of the finest warriors in the invasion fleet. He had killed 1,000 enemies in personal combat. He had never been defeated, never been wounded, never known fear. On the night of his death, Jurvex was leading a patrol through the industrial district. He had volunteered for patrol duty to show his warriors that there was nothing to fear. A commander should lead from the front, he believed. A commander should share the dangers his soldiers faced. It was the last mistake he ever made. The attack came without warning. One moment, Jurvex was walking at the head of his patrol. The next moment, something pulled him into the shadows. His warriors heard him scream once, a sound no Vethkai had ever made before. Then silence. They found his body the next morning. It was displayed in the center of a public square, arranged in a pattern that seemed almost ritualistic. His armor had been removed. His weapons had been taken, and carved into the ground beside him were words in a language no Vethkai could read. Major Walker had written those words. They were simple, direct, and designed to send a message. We are here. We can reach you anywhere. And you cannot stop us. The Hive Admiral received this news with something close to panic. 3 commanders dead in less than 2 weeks. Each one killed in a different way. Each one killed despite heavy security. Each one killed by an enemy that no one had seen. He demanded answers from his intelligence officers. Who was doing this? How were they doing it? Where were they hiding? The officers had no answers. They searched the city from top to bottom. They interrogated survivors. They analyzed sensor data and communication intercepts. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. The human operators left no traces. They moved like shadows, struck like lightning, and vanished like smoke. They had trained for years to be invisible, and they were very good at their job. The occupation forces began to change. Patrols that had once moved with casual confidence now moved with nervous caution. Warriors who had laughed at the weakness of their prey now jumped at every shadow. Commanders who had felt invincible now slept with weapons by their sides. Fear was spreading through the Vethkai ranks. Real fear, not the manufactured terror they inflicted on others. For the first time in millennia, they were experiencing what their victims felt, and the humans had barely begun. Walker gathered his team in a safe house deep in the ruins. They had been operating for 3 weeks now, and they had accomplished more than he had dared hope. 5 high-value targets eliminated, 3 supply depots destroyed, dozens of patrols ambushed and wiped out. But more importantly, they had planted seeds of doubt in the Vethkai mind. The demons were no longer sure of themselves. They no longer moved through the city like masters. They moved like prey. Intelligence reports that the Hive Admiral is bringing in reinforcements, Walker told his team. 3 elite hunter packs from the main fleet. They're specialists in tracking and killing difficult targets. Sergeant Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. They're sending hunters to hunt us? They think they can find us by being better predators, Walker said. They don't understand that we're not hiding from them. We're waiting for them. He spread a map across the table. It showed the city, marked with patrol routes, supply lines, and communication nodes. It also showed the expected insertion points for the elite hunter packs. The Vethkai believe they are the apex predators of the galaxy, Walker continued. They have hunted thousands of species to extinction. They have never met anything that could threaten them in their own environment. He looked at each team member in turn. We are going to kill every single member of these hunter packs. We are going to do it quickly, efficiently, and brutally. And we are going to make sure the survivors know exactly what happened. Lieutenant Chen frowned. Why make sure they know? Wouldn't it be better to keep them guessing? No, Walker said. We want them to know. We want them to understand that their best hunters, their finest warriors, were destroyed by creatures they consider weak and primitive. We want them to realize that nothing they send against us will be enough. He tapped the map. The goal is not just to kill the enemy. The goal is to break their will to fight. Every Vethkai on this planet needs to understand that they are not safe, that they cannot protect themselves, that no matter what they do, we can reach them. The first hunter pack arrived 2 days later. They were 12 Vethkai, the finest warriors the Hive had ever produced. Each one had killed hundreds of enemies. Each one had completed missions that normal warriors considered impossible. They landed in the Eastern Industrial District and began their hunt immediately. They were confident. They were skilled. They knew exactly how to track and kill elusive prey. They found the first human team's trail within 6 hours. Boot prints in dust, a discarded food wrapper, subtle signs that only the best trackers would notice. The hunters followed the trail with growing excitement. Finally, they would face these mysterious enemies. Finally, they would prove their superiority. The trail led to an abandoned factory. The hunters surrounded the building, covered all exits, and moved in with perfect coordination. They expected to find their prey cowering inside, waiting to die. They found an empty building rigged with explosives. The blast killed 8 of the 12 hunters instantly. The remaining 4 staggered from the wreckage, wounded and disoriented. They tried to call for support, but their communication devices did not work. Something was jamming their signals. They tried to retreat, but the streets around them had changed. Debris blocked paths that had been clear moments before. They were trapped in a maze of their own making. The humans came for them in the darkness, not as a group, but one by one. They struck from shadows, from above, from below. They used knives and garrots and bare hands. They killed silently, efficiently, without mercy. The last hunter died with a human's knife in his throat, looking into eyes that held no fear, no anger, no emotion at all. Just cold, professional focus. Walker cleaned his blade and signaled his team to move. One hunter packed down. Two to go. The second pack lasted 3 days. The third lasted less than one. By the end of the week, 36 of the Vethkai's finest warriors were dead. None had killed a single human. None had even managed to see their killers clearly. The Hive Admiral received the news in his command ship above Thesson Prime. He stared at the reports for a long time, trying to understand what he was reading. His best hunters destroyed. His occupation forces paralyzed by fear. His entire strategy crumbling. He summoned his war council. The commanders who attended were nervous, constantly looking over their shoulders. They had all heard the rumors now. Something was hunting the hunters, something that could not be stopped. "We must respond with overwhelming force," one commander suggested. "Level the entire city, kill everything that moves, remove any possible hiding place for these creatures." The Hive Admiral considered this. It was the traditional Vethkai response to resistance. Destroy everything. Leave nothing alive. But something told him it would not work here. "They are not hiding in the city," he said slowly. "They are the city. They move through it like blood through veins." Destroying the city would not destroy them. It would only make them harder to find. "Then what do we do?" another commander asked. His voice cracked with something that sounded dangerously like fear. The Hive Admiral did not answer. For the first time in his long life, he did not know what to do. Far below, in the ruins of Thesson Prime's capital, Major Walker received a message from Ambassador Chen. The Concorde was watching. The galaxy was watching. What the Special Forces were doing was being noticed. Walker read the message and allowed himself a small smile. Phase 1 was complete. The Vethkai were afraid. Their command structure was destabilized. Their morale was shattered. Now it was time for Phase 2. He gathered his team and the other operators who had survived the first weeks of the campaign. 203 humans, tired but determined, ready for whatever came next. "We have shown them that they can die," Walker said. "Now we show them that they can break." He outlined the plan for what he called Operation Reckoning. It would be the largest coordinated strike the Special Forces had ever attempted. It would hit 17 targets simultaneously. It would demonstrate, once and for all, that the Vethkai could not protect themselves, their leaders, or their infrastructure. And it would include a personal message for the Hive Admiral himself. The operators dispersed into the darkness, each one moving toward their assigned position. They had 36 hours to prepare, 36 hours to rest, to plan, to sharpen their weapons and their minds. And then the night would belong to them. The Vethkai had taught the galaxy to fear the dark. Now they would learn why humans had always feared it too. Because in the dark, the monsters were real, and sometimes the monsters were human. The Hive Admiral Zarvoth had conquered 17 worlds in his career. He had broken 100 species. He had watched civilizations crumble before the might of the Vethkai. He was considered one of the greatest military leaders his species had ever produced. Now he sat alone in his chambers, unable to sleep, jumping at every sound. It had been 42 days since the human operators had begun their campaign. In that time, the occupation of Thesson Prime had transformed from a triumph into a nightmare. 23 commanders were dead. Hundreds of warriors had been killed in ambushes, accidents, and attacks that came without warning. Supply lines had been cut so many times that some units were running out of ammunition. But the worst part was the fear. The Vethkai were a species that fed on terror. They had evolved to sense it, to savor it, to draw strength from it. They had always been the ones who caused fear, never the ones who felt it. Now they understood what their prey had always experienced. and they could not bear it. Soldiers refused to patrol alone. They traveled in groups of 10 or more, weapons constantly ready, eyes scanning every shadow. They knew it would not help. The humans had killed patrols of 20 without suffering a single casualty, but moving in groups made them feel safer, even if it was an illusion. Commanders slept in shifts, if they slept at all. They had learned that sleeping alone was dangerous. 3 commanders had been killed in their beds, throats cut so cleanly that their guards never heard a sound. Now they surrounded themselves with warriors at all times, hoping that numbers would provide protection. Communication officers had stopped using standard frequencies. The humans seemed to intercept every message, to know every plan before it was executed. Secure channels that had never been broken were compromised within hours. The Vethkai had started using runners to carry messages, like primitives from a forgotten age, and everywhere rumors spread. Whispers of ghosts that could walk through walls, stories of demons that could appear and disappear at will, tales of humans who felt no fear, no pain, no mercy. The soldiers had begun performing ancient rituals, prayers that had not been spoken in generations. Ceremonies meant to ward off evil spirits. They carved protective symbols into their armor and painted their faces with sacred marks. The officers pretended not to notice. Officially, such superstitions were forbidden. The Vethkai were a species of science and reason. They did not believe in demons or spirits, but privately some officers had begun performing the rituals themselves. Intercepted communications told the story of a military force that was breaking apart. Walker read the transcripts with cold satisfaction. Unit 73 reports that 5 warriors have abandoned their posts. They are requesting permission to execute the deserters. Commander Vexthul has refused to leave his bunker for 3 days. His subordinates are unsure how to proceed. The soldiers are asking for more guards. There are not enough guards. They are threatening to stop patrolling entirely. Something killed 6 warriors in Sector 9 last night. There are no witnesses. There is no evidence. The soldiers are saying it was spirits. Walker set down the transcripts and looked at his team. They were tired. They had been operating continuously for 6 weeks, sleeping in shifts, eating field rations, living in the ruins like animals. But their eyes were sharp and their spirits were high. The enemy is breaking, Walker said. Their morale is destroyed. Their command structure is paralyzed. They are ready for the final blow. He activated a holographic display showing the city and the surrounding area. 17 targets were marked in red: power stations, communication hubs, supply depots, command centers. Operation Reckoning will hit all of these targets simultaneously. The goal is not just to destroy infrastructure. The goal is to demonstrate that we can strike anywhere, anytime, with perfect coordination. We want them to understand that there is nowhere they can hide. Sergeant Rodriguez studied the display. What about the Hive Admiral? He's been in orbit since the campaign began. We can't reach him up there. Walker smiled. It was a thin, predatory expression. The Hive Admiral landed 3 days ago. He's in the Planetary Command Center trying to personally restore order. He thinks his presence will boost morale. He made himself a target, Lieutenant Chen said. He made himself our target, Walker agreed. Team 3 will penetrate the command center while the other attacks are in progress. Their objective is not to kill the Hive Admiral. Not yet. Their objective is to deliver a message. He explained the plan in detail. It was complex, dangerous, and required perfect timing from 12 different teams. One mistake could expose them all, but the Special Forces did not make mistakes. That was why they were special. The 42nd night of the occupation began like any other. The stars wheeled overhead. The ruins of the city stood silent. Vethkai patrols moved through the streets, nervous and alert. At exactly midnight, the first power station exploded. It was not a small explosion. The blast could be seen from orbit, a pillar of fire that lit up the night sky. The power station had provided electricity to the entire northern occupation zone. Now it was a crater. Before the Vethakai could respond, the second explosion came, then the third, then the fourth. Across the city, power stations, communication arrays, and supply depots erupted in flames. The explosions came in perfect sequence, each one timed to cause maximum chaos and confusion. Emergency channels filled with panicked reports. Units tried to respond but found their communications jammed. Commanders issued orders that never reached their intended recipients. The Vethkai command structure, already weakened by weeks of attrition, collapsed completely. And while the explosions provided distraction, Team 3 moved through the darkness toward the planetary command center. The command center was the most heavily defended location on Thesson Prime. 300 guards surrounded it at all times. Multiple layers of security protected every entrance. The Hive Admiral himself had designed the defenses, confident that nothing could penetrate them. Team 3 was 8 operators. They approached from the waste processing tunnels beneath the building, a route so obvious that the Vethkai had dismissed it as impossible. After all, the tunnels were filled with sensors and traps. No one could navigate them without being detected. No one except humans who had spent 3 weeks mapping every sensor and disabling every trap, one by one, without triggering any alarms. They emerged inside the security perimeter at exactly 12:17, while the attention of every guard was focused on the chaos outside. They moved through the building like shadows, avoiding patrols, slipping past checkpoints, ascending through maintenance shafts toward the upper levels. At 12:32, they reached the Hive Admiral's personal chambers. The guards outside the door died silently, their throats cut before they could raise an alarm. The electronic locks were bypassed in seconds. The door slid open without a sound. The Hive Admiral was awake, standing at his window, watching the fires burn across his conquered city. He did not hear the door open. He did not sense the humans enter his room. He was too focused on the destruction of everything he had built. He turned when he heard the first guard fall. His eyes widened as he saw the figures in black, faces painted with darkness, weapons raised. For a moment he froze. For a moment he felt something he had not felt in centuries. He felt afraid. One of the operators spoke. Her voice was calm, almost friendly. "We could kill you right now. We could kill every Vethkai in this building. We could kill every Vethkai on this planet if we chose to." She stepped forward, and the Hive Admiral stepped back. He who had never retreated from any enemy, retreated from this small, fragile human. "But we're not going to kill you," she continued. "Not tonight. Tonight we have a different message." She gestured to the other operators. They produced equipment and began their work. The Hive Admiral watched in horror as they disabled his communication systems, removed his weapons, and bound his guards with restraints that the Vethkai could not break. "We see you," the operator said. "We know you. We can reach you anywhere, anytime, through any defense you can imagine. There is no place in this galaxy where you will be safe from us." She produced a knife. It was a simple weapon, primitive by Vethkai standards. But in her hands it seemed more dangerous than any plasma cannon. "This is a lesson," she said. "Remember it." The knife moved. The Hive Admiral screamed. When the Vethkai guards finally broke into the chambers, they found the Hive Admiral on the floor. He was alive, but he would never walk again. His legs had been removed with surgical precision, the wounds cauterized so he would not bleed to death. On the wall above him, written in his own blood, were words in the human language. A translator was brought to read them. "We see you. We know you. Run." The message spread through the Vethkai ranks like wildfire. The Hive Admiral, their supreme commander, had been attacked in his own chambers. The humans had passed through 300 guards, 17 security checkpoints, and the most advanced defenses the Vethkai possessed. and they had chosen not to kill him, just to prove that they could. The psychological impact was devastating. If the Hive Admiral was not safe, no one was safe. If the most protected being on the planet could be reached, anyone could be reached. Warriors who had been fighting through their fear suddenly lost the will to continue. Desertion rates skyrocketed. Units refused to leave their barracks. Commanders refused to leave their bunkers. And still the attacks continued. Every night brought new deaths, new explosions, new reminders that the humans were out there, watching, waiting. The Vethkai had brought war to the galaxy. They had spread terror across 1,000 worlds. They had fed on the fear of billions. Now they understood what it meant to be on the other side. On the 45th night, a Vethkai soldier was found alone in a ruined building. He had been there for 3 days, hiding, too afraid to move. When rescue teams finally reached him, he was clutching a crude protective charm and whispering prayers to gods his species had abandoned millennia ago. He told his rescuers that he had seen something in the darkness, something with the face of a human but the eyes of a demon, something that had looked at him, considered him, and decided to let him live. They are not creatures, he whispered. They are punishment. They are what comes for those who hunt the innocent. His superiors dismissed his words as madness, but privately many of them wondered if he was right. The Vethkai had always believed they were the ultimate predators. They had hunted countless species across the galaxy. They had never encountered anything that could threaten them. Now they had found something worse than a predator. They had found a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. A species that did not fear death, did not accept defeat, did not stop until its enemies were destroyed. They had found humanity, and humanity had found them. In orbit above Thesan Prime, the Vethkai fleet began preparing for withdrawal. The invasion was not over, the commanders told themselves. They were simply regrouping. They would return with greater force. But deep in their hearts, they knew the truth. They were running. And for the first time in their long history, the Vethkai were the ones who were afraid. The liberation of Thesan Prime took 93 days. On the final day, the Vethkai did not retreat. They fled. Their ships broke orbit in disarray, abandoning equipment, supplies, and even wounded warriors in their desperation to escape. They had come to this world as conquerors. They left as survivors. Major Walker stood on a rooftop and watched the Vethkai transports disappear into the sky. His face showed no emotion. There was no joy in this moment, no celebration. There was only the quiet satisfaction of a job completed. Around him, the ruins of the capital city stretched to the horizon. So much had been destroyed. So many had died. The cost of victory was written in rubble and blood. But there had been victory. That was what mattered. Ambassador Chen arrived 3 days later, along with a delegation from the Concord. They walked through the ruins in silence, their eyes wide with shock. They had expected to find nothing left. They had expected to find only graves. Instead, they found survivors. Thousands of them, emerging from hiding places throughout the city. They were thin and frightened, but they were alive. The human operators had protected them, had drawn the Vethkai's attention away from the civilian population, had given them a chance to survive. High Counselor Vetheron approached Ambassador Chen. His 4 eyes were wet with tears. "How?" he asked. "How did you do this?" Chen looked at the old Kellery with something close to pity. "We did what was necessary," she said. "Nothing more, nothing less." "But your numbers. The reports say you deployed only 200 operators against 60,000 Vethkai. It is impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Chen replied. "Only difficult." The Concord Intelligence Services spent months analyzing the Thesan Prime campaign. They interviewed survivors, studied sensor records, and reconstructed every operation in painstaking detail. What they found changed everything they thought they knew about warfare. The human special forces had deployed 214 operators to Thesson Prime. Over the course of 93 days, they had eliminated over 9,000 Vethkai warriors, including most of the occupation force's leadership. They had destroyed critical infrastructure throughout the city. They had completely paralyzed the enemy's command and control capabilities. Human casualties: 11 dead, 23 wounded. The numbers were not a mistake. The analysts checked and rechecked. 214 soft, short-lived, psychically null mammals had achieved a victory that the combined might of the Concorde could not match. The analysts struggled to understand how this was possible. The Vethkai were physically superior in every way. They were stronger, faster, more durable. They could see in the dark. They could sense fear. They had natural armor that could stop most weapons. None of it had mattered. The humans had not fought the Vethkai on their terms. They had not met them in open battle or challenged them to contests of strength. They had simply killed them, one by one, in ways that the Vethkai could not predict or defend against. The Concorde had always believed that war was about fleets and armies, about overwhelming force and technological superiority. The humans had shown them something different. They had shown them that war was about will, about determination, about the willingness to do whatever was necessary to destroy your enemy. And in that kind of war, the humans had no equal. The Vethkai fleet retreated to their base of operations in the outer systems. Their invasion of Concorde space had stalled completely. They still held several conquered worlds, but they made no move to expand further. They seemed to be waiting for something. 6 months after the liberation of Thesson Prime, the Vethkai Hive Mother requested negotiations. It was unprecedented. The Vethkai had never negotiated with any species. They had always simply taken what they wanted. The very concept of diplomacy was foreign to them. But everything had changed. The humans had changed everything. The negotiations took place on a neutral station at the edge of Concorde space. Ambassador Chen represented humanity. She faced the Vethkai delegation with the same calm expression she always wore. The Vethkai Hive Mother was ancient, perhaps the oldest living member of her species. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. "We have reconsidered our approach to the younger species," she said. "We believe that further conflict would be unproductive." Chen nodded. "I see. We are prepared to withdraw from all conquered territory. We will return the surviving populations of the worlds we have occupied. We will provide compensation for the damage we have caused. And in exchange?" The Hive Mother's eyes flickered with something that might have been shame. "We ask only that you do not pursue us, that you do not hunt us as we hunted you." Chen was silent for a long moment. She thought of the billions who had died. She thought of the worlds that had been destroyed. She thought of the survivors who would carry the scars of this invasion for generations. Then she thought of what further war would cost. More death, more destruction, more families torn apart. "We accept your terms," she said, "on one condition. Name it. You will never return. You will never threaten the Conquered or any of its member species again. If you violate this condition, we will not negotiate. We will not accept surrender. We will follow you to the edges of the universe if necessary, and we will destroy you completely." The Hive Mother shuddered. She believed every word. "Agreed," she said. The treaty was signed. The Vethkai withdrew from Concord space and disappeared into the void between galaxies, back to whatever darkness had spawned them. They kept their word. They never returned. But the galaxy did not forget. The Concorde held a ceremony to honor humanity's contribution to the war. Representatives from every surviving member species gathered to offer their thanks. They gave speeches about courage and sacrifice. They presented awards and medals. Major Walker and his surviving operators attended in their dress uniforms. They stood quietly while the speeches were made, accepting the thanks with the same professionalism they had shown throughout the campaign. When it was over, High Counselor Vethran approached Walker. The old Kellery looked at the human with an expression that mixed gratitude with something else, something like fear. "We have studied your history," Vethran said. "We have learned about your species' past, the wars you fought among yourselves, the weapons you created, the suffering you inflicted on each other." Walker said nothing. "We always wondered why you never stopped fighting," Vethran continued. "Why you continued to make war even after you had the technology to destroy your own world. We thought it was a sign of your primitive nature, your barbarism." He paused. "Now we understand. You were not fighting because you did not know better. You were fighting because you were preparing. Your entire history has been training for something like this." Walker finally spoke. "We hoped we would never need to use what we had learned. We hoped the galaxy would be peaceful, that we could leave our warrior traditions behind and join civilized society. And now?" Walker looked at the old Kalari with eyes that had seen too much. "Now we know that peace is not given. It must be earned. It must be protected. And sometimes protecting it requires doing terrible things." Vetheron nodded slowly. "You are a frightening species, humans. I say this not as an insult, but as a simple truth. You are capable of great kindness and great cruelty, great creation and great destruction. You contain multitudes that other species cannot comprehend." "We know," Walker said. "We have always known." In the years that followed, humanity's place in the galaxy changed forever. They were no longer seen as the weak, primitive newcomers who had barely earned membership in the Concord. They were seen as something else entirely. Other species looked at humans differently now. They saw the shopkeepers and scientists, the artists and farmers. They saw the friendly smiles and the helpful nature, but they also saw something else lurking beneath the surface. They saw the warriors. The special forces returned to their hidden bases and their quiet lives. Most of them retired, content that they had done their duty. A few continued to serve, training the next generation, passing on the knowledge that had saved the galaxy. Major Walker returned to Earth. He bought a small farm in a quiet valley and spent his days growing vegetables and watching the sunset. His neighbors knew him as a kind man who never spoke of his past. But sometimes, late at night, he would stand on his porch and look up at the stars. He would remember the friends he had lost. He would remember the enemies he had killed. He would remember the terrible, necessary things he had done to protect his people. And he would hope that no one would ever need to do them again. The Vethkai kept their promise. They never returned to conquered space. But they did not forget what had happened on Thesson Prime. They could not forget. In the darkest hours of their homeworld's night, when the shadows seemed to move and ancient fears rose unbidden, they taught their young about the humans, not as history, but as warning, as prayer. They told stories of the small, fragile beings who had defeated the unconquerable. They spoke of the ghosts who moved through darkness, like fish through water. They whispered about the creatures who felt no fear, who showed no mercy, who hunted the hunters until nothing remained. And they told their children to be careful, to be humble, to never again draw the attention of that terrible species from the galaxy's edge. Because humans, they whispered, do not fight like civilized beings. They do not follow the rules of honorable warfare. They do not accept defeat or offer surrender. They fight like something far older, far hungrier, far more dangerous than any demon. They fight like the monsters that monsters fear. And in the end, that was humanity's true gift to the galaxy. Not just the victory over the Vethkai, not just the liberation of Thesson Prime, but something more subtle and more lasting. They had shown the galaxy that size and strength and technology were not the only measures of power. That determination and will, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary could overcome any odds. That even the smallest, weakest species could become the most dangerous if they were pushed far enough. The Concord never threatened humanity. No species ever attacked human colonies or challenged human interests. They had seen what happened to those who tried, and in the quiet corners of the galaxy, in the places where old soldiers gathered to share old stories, they spoke of the human special forces with something approaching reverence. They called them warriors. They called them heroes. They called them saviors. But mostly they called them by the name that the Vethkai had given them, the name that had spread across 1,000 worlds and would be remembered for 1,000 years. They called them the demons who made demons quiver. And they were right.